Good morning, viewers. In the previous video, we have discussed the apex of the heart. Now I am going to discuss the base of the heart. As I have already told you people, this is the left ventricle, this is the right ventricle, this is auricle right, this is left, and the atria proper, they lie behind these vessels and behind the ventricles. Actually, both the atrias, they form the base. Likewise, I have drawn a triangle this way, right? This is a sternocostal surface, this one, which is formed mainly by the ventricles. I am comparing the shape of the heart with this three-sided triangle. This is the sternocostal surface, which is this I have drawn. This is the base posterior to these vessels, which is formed by both the right and left atrias. And this is the diaphragmatic or inferior surface, which lies beneath this diaphragmatic surface, which is below this surface, sternocostal surface, right? So this is sternocostal surface, posterior one is the diaphragmatic or base, posterior is the base, and inferior one is the diaphragmatic, right? Now come to the base. So the base or the posterior surface is most fixed part of the heart and is quadrilateral in outline, right? It is mainly made up of the two atrias, 2/3 by the left atria and 1/3 by the right atrias, right? Now if we see the boundaries, above we have bifurcation of pulmonary trunk and separated by sinus. Below we have atrioventricular groove. Posteriorly we have posterior interventricular groove. This one is the anterior interventricular groove, and this one is the anterior interventricular groove. This is interventricular groove in between two ventricles. This is atrioventricular groove, right part of atrioventricular groove. This is left part of the atrioventricular groove, right? Likewise, there is a posterior interventricular groove. So below we have posterior interventricular groove. Right side we have right atrium. On the left side we have left border of the left atrium, right? So these are the boundaries. Now main feature is of this base means it contains left and right atrium. So superior vena cava in the upper and posterior part of the right ventricle, inferior in the lower part and posterior part of the right ventricle, 4 pulmonary veins on each side of the posterior surface of left atrium. So these 6 veins, as I already discussed in pericardium, they are arranged in form of inverted J between the limbs of the posterior surface of the left atrium, right? Now, in the supine position, the base lies at the level of the 5th to 8th thoracic vertebra, while in standing position it lies at the level of T6 to T8 vertebra. The main clinical importance of the base is that during the mitral stenosis, the left atrium gets distended, which may cause difficulty in swallowing due to pressure on the esophagus, because posterior to the base lies the posterior mediastinum, and the structures in the posterior medium are esophagus. So when the right atrium gets distended in mitral stenosis, it causes difficulty in swallowing due to esophageal compression, and that is called Ortner's syndrome. I have written in this spelling Ortner's syndrome, right? This is the clinical importance of the base. Now apex is finished, base is finished. Now we come to the right border. Right is toward the right side, right? It is rounded and convex, formed mainly by the right atrium. So right border is this one, only this one. So it extends from the superior vena cava to the inferior vena cava. A shallow vertical groove, sulcus terminalis, accompanies the right border, right? And which correspond to the crista terminalis of the interior of the right atrium. If we cut through superior and inferior vena cava, we open the right atrium. So beneath it we have crista terminalis, interior, whose projection on the outer surface is called sulcus terminalis. This is its importance, right? This is our right border. Now the inferior border. This one is the inferior border. So it extends from, yes, it extends from the opening of the inferior vena cava to the apex of the heart. This one was right border, from superior vena cava to inferior vena cava. And this one is right border, this one is the inferior border, which extends from, yes, this one is the right border which extends from superior to inferior vena cava, and this is inferior border which expands from the inferior vena cava to apex. It means it is comprised mainly of the right part of the mainly it is formed from the right ventricle and a small part of the left ventricle, as the apex is mainly made up of left ventricle. So the border extends from this to this, so it is mainly made up of the right ventricle and a part of left ventricle, right? Now what is its importance? This border is accompanied by a vessel which is marginal branch of the right coronary artery, right? So right coronary artery branch runs in this atrioventricular sulcus. The right marginal branch of the right coronary artery runs near to this border, right? Close to the apex, it presents a notch which is called incisura apicis cordis. Incisura, incisura. I have written incisura apicis indicis. INDI, sorry, not indicis, it is cordis. CORDICs. Incisura apicis cordis. So near the apex we have a notch called incisura apicis cordis, right, which gives passage to the anterior branch, interventricular branch of left coronary artery. Left coronary artery is anterior branch, right? So let's revise the inferior border. It extends from the inferior vena cava to the apex. So it is mainly made up of the right ventricle and a part of the left ventricle. The main importance is this: it is accompanied by the marginal branch of the right coronary artery, and near the apex there is a notch called incisura apicis cordis, which gives passage to the anterior interventricular branch of the left coronary artery. Now we come to the left border. The inferior border is also called margo acutus. I have written here margo acutus, right? Likewise, we have this left border which is called margo obtutus. OBTUTUS, margo obtutus. This is the left border. We have finished the right border. This one is the inferior border and this is left border. So the left border is indefined and it extends from the left atria to the apex, right? So it is mainly made up of the left atrium small amount and mainly of the left ventricle, right? So border is accompanied by the marginal branch of the left coronary artery. Some people also include this border into the left border. Some authors say upper border a distinct identity which is mainly formed of upper limit of the left atrium, right? So we have right border, we have inferior border. Some author says only upper border, some author says left borders, right? So now come to the surfaces. First one is sternocostal surface. Next I have already discussed inferior surface or diaphragmatic, and we have left surface. Now sternocostal surface. Sternocostal surface separated from the base. This is a base which is hidden by these vessels, and from the base by the right border, and from the diaphragm by the inferior border. Diaphragmatic surface is below this, so it is separated from the diaphragmatic surface by the inferior border and from the base by the right border. Okay, now this surface has some features. First is the anterior part of the atrioventricular groove. This is the atrioventricular groove, anterior part, right? Anterior part, right. This is also atrioventricular groove. This is the left of the atrioventricle. These are atria, these are ventricles. So this is atrioventricular groove. So anterior part of the atrioventricular groove passes downwards, and this groove lodges the trunk of right coronary artery. This groove. So anterior part is here. Posterior part of the this groove, I mean atrioventricular groove, lies beneath the base. When we have discussed the base, we have discussed the boundaries, inferior boundary, which is posterior part of the atrioventricular groove, which lies beneath these vessels. So this is anterior part, right? Now anterior, one thing is atrioventricular, that is, and then is anterior interventricular grooves. Groove passes down near the inferior border, where it meets the inferior border at incisura apicis cordis, which I already discussed. This groove lodges the anterior interventricular branch of left coronary artery, right, and also the great cardiac vein. Okay, now come to the diaphragmatic surface. Diaphragmatic surface is beneath this surface, below one diaphragmatic, which rests on the diaphragm, right? It is flat and it is separated from the sternocostal surface by the inferior border and from the base by the posterior part of the anterior atrioventricular groove. Atrioventricular groove is here, and posteriorly we have posterior interventricular groove, which I draw in this diagram. This is posterior interventricular groove, right? This is the actually the posterior aspect of the heart. This is the sternocostal surface, right? So this is posterior surface. So this one is the diaphragmatic surface, right? And this one is the base. This triangle, base, diaphragmatic surface. This one is diaphragmatic surface. This is base made up of two atrias, right? This is diaphragmatic surface. So this one is the posterior interventricular groove, right? Now the posterior interventricular groove, this groove lodges posterior interventricular branch of the right coronary artery. Posterior interventricular groove lodges the posterior interventricular branch of the right coronary artery, right, and middle cardiac vein. Now come to the left surface. Left surface is this side. It is directed upwards, downwards, and towards the left, right? It is formed mainly by the left ventricle and partly by the left atrium and auricle. Mainly by the left ventricle and partly by the left auricle and atrium and auricle, right? Now, left part of the atrioventricular groove. I have already discussed right part of the atrioventricular groove, which lodges coronary artery. Now here lies the left part of the atrioventricular groove, which lodges circumflex branch of the left coronary artery, right? Right. This lodges right coronary artery. This lodges circumflex branch of the left coronary artery, right? And commencements of coronary sinus. Now, one thing is peculiar about the atrioventricular groove is that it is a C-shaped curved. Right part of the groove runs downwards and to the right in between the right atrium and right ventricle, right part, and it contains the trunk of right coronary artery. Left part of the groove intervenes between left auricle and ventricle and lodges the trunk of circumflex branch of the circumflex branch of the left coronary artery, right? Now the posterior part of the groove intervenes between the base and diaphragmatic surface, right, which lies here, posterior part of this groove. This one in this diagram. This is the posterior interventricular. Anterior lies on the sternocostal surface, right part and left part, anterior interventricular groove. This one and this one. And posterior part of the groove intervenes between the base, this is base, and the diaphragmatic surface, right, and mainly contains coronary sinus. Anastomosis of the right and left coronary artery takes place here. This meeting point of the intra-arterial, here comes the intra-arterial septum, here comes the interventricular septum, right? So meeting point of the intra-arterial groove, posterior interventricular groove, and posterior atrioventricular groove. This one is the posterior atrioventricular groove, right? And this is called the crux of the heart. There I have written the spelling. This is the crux of the heart. So I repeat the crux part. So what is crux? Now see, the meeting point of the intra-arterial. This is the posterior surface. This is the posterior part of the intra-arterial septum. This is the posterior part of interventricular septum. So this is the posterior interventricular groove. Intra-arterial septum, interventricular septum, and atrioventricular part of atrioventricular groove. Where they meet, they form the crux of the heart. Now some points to remember about here is heart presents only which apex only is formed by the left ventricle, right? Base only formed by the two atrias. Right border only forms by the right atrium from superior to inferior, and diaphragmatic surface only formed by the two surfaces, right? 2/3 of the base of the left atrium. Now come here, base. 2/3 of the base of the left atrium and 1/3 by the right atrium. Base 2/3 is formed by the left atrium and 1/3 by the right atrium. Right? Now come to the diaphragmatic surface. Here is the diaphragmatic surface. Two-thirds of the diaphragmatic surface is formed by the left ventricle and 1/3 by the right ventricle, as already seen here. 2/3 is formed by the left ventricle and 1/3 is by the right ventricle. 2/3 of the entire heart is towards the left of the midline, right? So this is all about the external features of the heart.